Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here. It is cold and frosty outside. It is cold and frosty inside, and yet lurking within my heart festers a secret rage, a private inferno, which, if not managed carefully and remaining unquenched, could threaten to make a conflagration of the constellations themselves. Yes, I am talking about the aspects that the Sun is currently making to both Pluto and Mars, those twin titans of aggression. First of all, I will begin by saying that Mercury is stationing direct today. So, whatever you've committed to, whatever things have been decided or worked on over the last 2 weeks may find themselves in a state of topsy-turvydom, suddenly going one direction and then another, and throwing everything up into the air in rather a chaotic manner. I don't want to focus too much on that aspect because I've already done a video on Mercury retrograde. I'm sure most of you are familiar with its effects. If you want to share any of your entertaining Mercury retrograde moments in the comments section, please do. But for now, I want to look at the cluster of conflicting aspects we're currently experiencing and the shapes they may take. Now, while I like to focus intensively on individual aspects in these videos, I think in astrology, when we're trying to calculate or just experience and navigate the effects of what the heavens are doing as a whole, it's always important to take a holistic approach. Because while we may sometimes have an aspect that appears very favorable or very fortunate or one that we can get on board with, if there are 3 or 4 other aspects that are very dissonant and difficult, that they can usually weigh out and crush the other one. Likewise, if there's one very difficult aspect but a whole cluster of very harmonious ones, we might find we're placed in a position where we can deal with these things better. So I often feel it's a bit like dealing with the heavens is a bit like being the conductor of an orchestra that is sometimes on your side and sometimes not. You may have a nice cluster of instruments over there all playing some lovely interweaving melodies and counterpoint, and then the others over there have decided, actually today we don't want to play Mozart, we're going to do some extreme technical death metal. And when they're playing at the same time, chaos ensues, as it so often does in the real world. And at the moment, in terms of conflicting interests in the heavens, we have the very sober, serious-minded, steadfast conjunction of Saturn and Venus. And then on the other side, we have the Sun conjunct Pluto, trining Mars, which is angry and rebellious and will stand up for itself with a life and death vigor. The conflict, in essence, is the friction between the part of us which wants to make sane, sensible, mature decisions that more or less keep things as they are and don't rock the boat, and then another part of us which will vehemently and radically stand up for itself and what it thinks is right, even if that means throwing the whole of your life into a state of destruction and disarray. So with Venus and Saturn, the real emphasis there is on making decisions that keep the groups to which one belongs harmonious and stable. Perhaps we have some private difficulties, some unhappiness, some lingering resentments or sources of depression that are caused by our relationships with people around us. And yet there's that part of us that says, no, my stability in this world is dependent on these other people around me. If I start lashing out, if I start putting myself forward, that's going to make things difficult for the group. So instead, I will be a mature adult. I will put my feelings down for the sake of my family, for the sake of my colleagues, for the sake of my relationship. It's all about just trying to reinforce and keep things as they are, because that's what Saturn does. Saturn is the great preserver of the zodiac. His job is to reinforce and consolidate and project what we already have in life and to keep it as this kind of frozen, safe museum piece. But very often the way Saturn will try and preserve and protect what we have in our lives is by shutting out new influences. It tends to always see any new influences, any influx of new energy into our life that isn't kind of carefully vetted in advance as just chaos that is potentially waiting to plant its seeds. Whereas with the Sun conjunct Pluto and trining Mars, they are more than happy to plant those seeds of wrath and to sow whatever destructive consequences arouse them. But if Saturn represents our social ego and our awareness of our dependence on the larger interpersonal groups that we are dependent upon for our survival, then the Sun is more about us as an individual, as this solar figure, this heroic entity that stands alone in the world. When the Sun is highlighted in an aspect, we are more interested in ourselves and our own personal development. And especially when it is an aspecting Mars, we become willing to stand up for ourselves, to take actions that are based on what we want and what we want to acquire and get out of reality. We become less willing to sacrifice ourselves or compromise ourselves for the sake of others. We start saying, well, what about me? What about the things that I value? What about what I want? Life is finite. When do I start getting something out of it? So there can be pros and cons of that kind of fiery martial energy. Usually we want to be much more active. We feel more decisive and restless. It's the time when things tend to get very busy because everyone wants to start making things happen. Rather than always procrastinating and delaying, we want things to have happened yesterday. We want them to happen now. We always want to be engaging in the fight and tumult of the present moment and not always waiting for a better day like Saturn will often caution us to do. And that naturally makes us more confident, but also more proud. Pride is a way of reinforcing the ego and our personal identity, and likewise it can also be a double-edged sword. If someone has no pride in themselves as an individual, then they can often be a doormat. They think they have no self-worth, nothing worth protecting or reinforcing, and so they're always willing to just surrender and submit themselves to other people. However, if we have too much pride, we can become arrogant and conceited, and we see just showing basic respect or decency or making any kind of allowances to other people as some kind of personal offense to us, the great I am. So these two clusters of aspects then have very different ways of responding to the conflicts and the dissonances and the interpersonal difficulties that will necessarily arise on, at any time in life, to be honest, really. And when conflict arises with Venus and Saturn, it will naturally say, if I start getting angry now, if I start beginning conflicts or creating difficulties with other people, that's only going to make my life more difficult. It's only going to interrupt my routine, my workflow, and all of these cogs and wheels that are spinning to keep my life running smoothly as it is. If there's a difficulty, if there's tension, I'm just going to either ignore that elephant in the room, or I'm going to withdraw on it. Or I'm going to say, I'm angry, but I'm a mature human being. I'm accountable for my own emotions, and therefore I will deal with them privately within the citadel of my own mind and, just put the feelings to one side for the sake of the group. With Sun conjunct Pluto and trining Mars, we don't want to do that. We want our feelings to be felt and to be acknowledged and to be respected by other people. Our feelings are no longer just these abstract, manageable things within us, but this flaming, raging fire. Our personal feelings, when dealt with Pluto, do take on that life and death intensity. In terms of the Sun representing our journey to become ourselves, to be authentic, to be real, to be this hero who is always themselves no matter what, we suddenly feel like we would rather die than do something that was not true to ourselves and the type of person we are willing to become. And therefore, if someone goes against something that matters to us, we are more likely to defend ourselves, to start a fight about it. We may even be willing to cut people quite radically and drastically out of our lives because we no longer feel our authenticity is compatible with the power these people try and have over us, because that's very often what happens with Sun conjunct Pluto. We become painfully aware that even though we are trying to become ourselves, there are forces who have power over us and who can exploit that power, who want us to make ourselves subservient to them, just as dictators and terrible politicians do. I think aspects like this are especially difficult to juggle because they demand that we serve multiple masters who are in no way in line in terms of the objectives that they are holding dear, and which aspects ultimately become dominant in terms of the decisions we make, to a large extent will be dependent on the type of person we are and the type of experiences that we favor or value in this life. But it can be easy to go to one extreme and then find we are regretful of the other. For instance, if we listen to Pluto and Mars, if we become willing to destroy and throw away all of the existing directions of our life in order to pursue something truer to ourselves, then we'll probably find ourselves missing that saturnine comfort and safety and security that we once had. We find ourselves, homeless or out on the streets adrift without any definite support around us, and we think, fuck, I've been true to myself, but where do I go next? I am a hero who has just emerged from a battle, and now I am in no man's land with no clear idea of where to go. Likewise, if we commit totally to being that saturnine person who just crushes their feelings down for the sake of the larger group, then at some point we're going to start feeling just very shit inside. We're going to be eaten up by resentment, by rage, by hatred and anger of all that we have left unlived. Because that is really what Sun Mars wants. It wants us to live more of our heroic life. It wants to live more of us. Not someone else's dreams for our life, not society's dreams for our life, but what we have always dreamt, what we have always felt we're meant to be doing in this world. That is what it wants to pursue. That is what it wants to feel emboldened and uplifted by. And if you are truly aligned with your vision, then sometimes there is no sacrifice that is too great if we realize that we have deviated too strongly from the reason why we're even alive or here at all. And that is something we can only fully understand by being in touch with our own authenticity, with our own originality. Now, in the UK, we can already see how these conflicting approaches are playing out in the currently very increasingly unstable political and social situation. We've got nurses on strikes, we've got rail strikes, we've got all these different workers on strikes, we've got people rebelling against the government's undemocratic quashing of Scotland's attempts to create more rights for people like me. And then we've got the Tory government on the other side, fully embodying that Venus-Saturn conjunction, just going, nope, everything's fine, nothing needs to change, the world is perfect as it was before all of you new young radical people came along and started demanding actual rights and respect and privileges that only we, the wealthy and in power, should enjoy. So what is going on out in the world is always on some level taking place within us too. And therein is the everlasting drama and tournament of the stars jousting with one another in those celestial vaults. Anyway, that was all a bit messy. Again, still sleep deprived. But if you have any comments or anything else you'd like to talk about, please leave some messages, and like, share, and subscribe.